The letter was slipped into my hand during the most sacred moment of my life. I was standing at the podium in St. Matthew's Church on a rain-soaked October afternoon, eulogizing the man I'd loved for 23 years. My husband David had been gone for 3 days, and I was barely holding myself together with black mascara and sheer willpower. David was a devoted husband, I heard myself saying to the 100 faces looking up at me with sympathy. He always put family first. The words felt like glass in my throat, but I spoke them anyway, because that's what widows do. We perform grief. We say the right things. We make everyone else comfortable with death. Behind me, the casket was covered in white lilies, David's favorite flowers, though he'd never actually told me that. I'd guessed. 23 years of marriage, and I was still guessing what he preferred. That should have been my first clue. The mysterious woman approached during the closing hymn. Mid-50s, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a black dress that looked expensive. She wasn't family. I knew everyone in David's family, and this woman was a stranger. She moved through the pews like she belonged there, nodding respectfully to other mourners, her face composed with appropriate sorrow. When she reached me at the front of the church, she took my hand in both of hers. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said softly. Her grip was firm, purposeful, and when she released my hand, I felt something crisp and rectangular pressed into my palm. An envelope. "He wanted you to have this," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine for just a moment. "He said if anything ever happened, I should make sure you got it." Before I could ask who she was or what she meant, she melted back into the crowd of mourners offering condolences. I searched the faces around me, but she was gone, vanished like she'd never been there at all. The envelope burned against my palm like a secret. My sister-in-law Carol grabbed my elbow, steering me toward the fellowship hall where the reception was being held. "Come on, honey. People want to share their memories of David." I clutched the envelope tighter, feeling its sharp edges dig into my skin. The paper felt expensive, heavy, important. "I need a moment," I told Carol. "Of course you do. Let me get you some water." The church ladies made that terrible coffee again, but no. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "I need to be alone." Carol's face crumpled with hurt, but I couldn't handle her feelings right now. I couldn't handle anyone's feelings. My own were threatening to drown me. I escaped to the church office, a small room behind the sanctuary that smelled like old books and lemon furniture polish. My hands were shaking as I closed the door and leaned against it. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive stationery. My name was written across the front in David's familiar handwriting. "For Rebecca. If you're reading this, I'm gone." My heart was hammering against my ribs, hard, irregular beats that made me dizzy. I tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter inside was 3 pages long, but the first line was all I needed to see. "Rebecca, I need to tell you about Sarah. I chose her over you. I'm sorry." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the pastor's desk chair, the letter fluttering in my hands like a dying bird. I chose her over you. 23 years of marriage, and my husband's final message to me was about another woman, someone named Sarah, who had meant more to him than I did. "I chose her over you." The words echoed in my head, growing louder with each repetition. I felt sick, actually physically sick. My stomach churned, and I tasted bile in the back of my throat. The letter continued, but the words blurred together through my tears. Something about meetings, about stolen moments, about a relationship that had lasted 15 years. 15 years. More than half our marriage. While I was working overtime to pay for his business ventures, he was with Sarah. While I was nursing him through his heart attack 2 years ago, he was thinking about Sarah. While I was planning our 25th anniversary celebration, he was living a double life with someone whose existence I'd never even suspected. "I chose her over you. I'm sorry." The casual cruelty of those words was breathtaking. As if 23 years of devotion could be dismissed with an apology. As if decades of sacrifice and love were worth exactly 6 words of acknowledgement. A knock on the office door made me jump. "Rebecca." Carol's voice was muffled through the wood. "Everyone's asking where you are. The pastor wants to say the closing prayer." I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing mascara across my wrist. "I'll be right there." "Are you okay in there? You sound funny." Funny. My entire world had just collapsed, and I sounded funny. "I'm fine," I lied, shoving the letter back into its envelope. "Just need another minute." "Okay, but hurry up." Mrs. Henderson made her famous potato salad, and you know how fast that goes. Potato salad. While I was discovering that my marriage had been a lie, Carol was worried about potato salad. I stood up on unsteady legs, smoothing down my black dress and checking my reflection in the window. I looked exactly the same as I had 20 minutes ago. Grieving widow, devoted wife, respectable woman in mourning. But everything had changed. I walked back into the fellowship hall like a ghost returning to the world of the living. People patted my shoulder and murmured condolences. They told me stories about David's kindness, his generosity, his dedication to his work. Nobody mentioned Sarah. Nobody knew about Sarah except me and David, and the mysterious woman who delivered his final betrayal like a time bomb set to explode at his funeral. I nodded and smiled and thanked people for coming. I accepted casseroles and flower arrangements. I listened to stories about the wonderful husband I'd apparently never really known, all while the letter burned in my purse like evidence of a crime. "I chose her over you." The reception lasted 2 hours. 2 hours of performing normalcy while my world crumbled around me. 2 hours of being the grieving widow while learning I'd never actually been the cherished wife. When the last mourner finally left, I sat alone in my car in the church parking lot, rain drumming against the windshield, and let myself fall apart. How had I been so blind? How had 23 years of marriage been built on a foundation of lies, so complete that I'd never even suspected? How did a marriage lead to a moment like this? I want to tell you something, and I need you to really listen. If you have ever felt blindsided by someone you trusted completely, you're going to understand every word I'm about to say. If you've ever discovered that the person you loved most was living a secret life, you know the exact moment I'm talking about. That moment when your entire reality shifts, when 23 years of memories suddenly look different, when you realize you were living in a marriage that existed only in your imagination. My name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm 64 years old, and 3 days ago, I buried my husband of 23 years. I thought I was grieving the loss of my soulmate. Instead, I was mourning a man who never existed. That letter changed everything, not just my understanding of David, but my understanding of myself, of love, of the difference between devotion and delusion. I know what you're thinking right now. How could she not know? How do you live with someone for over 2 decades and not realize they're having an affair? I asked myself those same questions for months. I stayed awake at night, replaying every conversation, every missed dinner, every business trip that lasted too long. I made lists of the signs I'd missed, the red flags I'd ignored, the moments when the truth was probably staring me in the face. But here's what I learned. When you love someone completely, you don't look for reasons not to trust them. You look for reasons to justify the trust you've already given. When David worked late, I admired his dedication. When he traveled for conferences, I supported his career ambitions. When he seemed distant, I blamed stress. When he stopped reaching for me in bed, I assumed it was his heart medication. I spent 23 years making excuses for a man who was making time for someone else. If you've ever been called naive for trusting too much, if you've ever been told you were too good for someone who was taking advantage of that goodness, if you've ever discovered that your version of love was one-sided, well, you're not alone. You are absolutely not alone. I've gotten hundreds of messages since I started sharing pieces of this story online. People who discovered affairs after decades of marriage. Wives who found second phones, second bank accounts, second lives they never knew existed. Husbands who learned their partners had been planning exit strategies for years. The most common thing people tell me, I thought I was the only one who was that blind. But we weren't blind. We were loving. And there's a difference. This story isn't just about infidelity. It's about what happens when you give everything to someone who's only giving you part of themselves. It's about the moment you realize that sacrifice without reciprocity is just self-destruction in disguise. It's about learning the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in that love. I'm going to share all of it with you. The signs I missed, the money I spent trying to fix problems that weren't actually problems, the years I spent being grateful for crumbs while someone else got the whole meal. But I'm also going to share what happened after, how I rebuilt my life from the ground up, how I learned to tell the difference between love and habit, between partnership and performance, how I finally figured out that being alone was better than being lonely in a marriage. If you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, if you've ever wondered if you were asking for too much by wanting to be someone's first choice, if you've ever felt guilty for wanting more than you were getting, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if these words are resonating with you, because you're going to need reminders that you deserve better. You're going to need a community that understands what it feels like to wake up one day and realize you've been living someone else's version of your own life. And you're going to need to remember that it's never too late to start choosing yourself. Let me go back to where it all began. Before the secrets, before the heartbreak. Back to when I thought love meant never questioning anything, never asking for more, never expecting to be someone's first choice. That's where this story really starts. September 1983. I was 19 years old. The University of Minnesota Library was my sanctuary. Third floor, northeast corner, where the fluorescent lights hummed softly and the heating pipes clanked like old bones. I spent 12 hours a day there, studying business administration on a scholarship that covered tuition but nothing else. My apartment was a studio above Murphy's Tavern, $400 a month. I could smell beer and cigarette smoke through the floorboards, but it was mine. That's where I met David. He was 21, 2 years ahead of me, studying communications with the easy confidence of someone who'd never worried about money. Dark hair, green eyes, and a smile that made me forget I was supposed to be studying for my accounting midterm. "You've been here since 8 this morning," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Don't you ever take breaks?" I looked up from my calculator and spreadsheets. "Breaks are expensive." He laughed like I'd told a joke. "What do you mean?" "Time is money. If I'm not studying, I'm not working. If I'm not working, I can't pay rent." The concept genuinely confused him. David came from the kind of family where college was expected, not earned, where parents paid for books and living expenses and spring break trips to Cancun. I came from the kind of family where education was a luxury we couldn't afford. But I was determined to have anyway. "I work at the campus bookstore," I explained, closing my textbook. 25 hours a week at $4.50 an hour, plus I clean offices downtown on weekends. $12 an hour, cash. That's a lot of hours. That's survival. David studied my face like I was speaking a foreign language. "What about your parents?" "My dad drives truck. My mom cleans houses. They've got 3 kids younger than me to worry about." Something shifted in his expression then. Not pity, exactly, but a kind of fascination, like I was an exotic creature he'd discovered in his natural habitat. "You're incredible," he said quietly. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. No one had ever called me incredible before. Hardworking, yes. Responsible, sure. But incredible was new. That weekend, he asked me out. Dinner at a place called Romano's, where the pasta cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. I wore my only dress, navy blue polyester from JCPenney, and felt wildly underdressed among the cloth napkins and wine glasses. "Order whatever you want," David said, not even looking at the prices. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and ate half of it, wrapping the rest in napkins to take home. Leftovers meant I wouldn't have to buy lunch tomorrow. David watched me do it with that same fascinated expression. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. "I've got this covered." "I know, but waste bothers me." "It's not waste if I'm paying for it. Money's still money, even if it's not mine." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was soft, uncalloused, the hands of someone who'd never scrubbed floors or counted coins. I've never met anyone like you, he said. By Christmas, we were inseparable. David would study with me in the library, bringing coffee and sandwiches when I forgot to eat. He'd walk me home from my weekend cleaning jobs, carrying my supplies, and listening to me complain about entitled professors who left their offices looking like war zones. You shouldn't have to work this hard, he said one snowy December evening, as we climbed the stairs to my apartment. Everyone works hard. Not like this. Not at 19. I unlocked my door, and we stepped into my tiny studio. David looked around at the second-hand furniture, the hot plate that served as my kitchen, the single bed pushed against the wall. Move in with me, he said suddenly. What? I've got a 2-bedroom apartment. My dad pays the rent. You could save all that money you're spending on this place. The offer was tempting. $400 a month would buy a lot of textbooks, a lot of groceries, a lot of security. But I shook my head. I need to be independent. This isn't independence. This is suffering. It's my suffering. I earned it. David sat down on my lumpy couch and pulled me onto his lap. I want to take care of you. The words made something flutter in my chest. Take care of me. After 19 years of taking care of everyone else, my younger siblings, my exhausted parents, myself, the idea of being cared for felt like the most luxurious gift imaginable. I'll always have your back, I told him, meaning it completely. By spring semester, the pattern was established. David would help with my tuition when I came up short. I would type his papers when he fell behind. He'd take me to restaurants I couldn't afford. I'd nurse him through hangovers and help him study for exams he'd neglected. The giving felt good, natural, like love was supposed to look. When David's senior year arrived, and he faced a family crisis, his father's business struggling, college funds suddenly uncertain, I didn't hesitate. I'll cover your last semester, I told him, pulling out my savings account statement, $8,000. Every penny I'd earned cleaning offices and selling textbooks back. Rebecca, I can't take your money. It's not taking if I'm offering. But that's all your savings. Money can be replaced. You can't. He cried when I wrote the check. Actually cried, holding me tight and promising he'd pay me back as soon as he got his first job. You don't have to pay me back, I whispered into his shoulder. We're a team. I believed that completely. We were building something together. David would graduate, get a good job, and then it would be his turn to support us while I finished my degree. That's how partnerships worked, right? You took turns lifting each other up. I increased my work hours to cover the lost savings, 30 hours at the bookstore, 16 hours cleaning offices, 8 hours tutoring underclassmen in accounting, 54 hours a week while carrying a full course load. My grades slipped, my weight dropped. I was exhausted all the time. But David was happy, stress-free, able to focus on his final semester without worrying about money. That felt like love to me. Self-sacrifice in service of someone else's dreams. I was proud of what I could provide, proud of how strong I could be, proud of loving someone enough to put their needs ahead of my own comfort. At David's graduation, I sat in the audience wearing the same navy dress from our first date. He walked across that stage because of my $8,000, my sleepless nights, my willingness to work myself to exhaustion for his success. When they called his name, he looked right at me and mouthed, "Thank you." I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. What began with sacrifice turned into a pattern I couldn't escape. Our first apartment together was a 1-bedroom in northeast Minneapolis. $700 a month, split between us. I thought sharing expenses would make life easier. I was wrong about that too. David landed his first job at a marketing firm 6 months after graduation. Entry level, $32,000 a year. Good money in 1984, especially compared to my bookstore wages. We're going to be fine, he said, signing the lease with a confident flourish. Better than fine. We're going to build something incredible together. The first year was everything I dreamed of. David left for work in pressed shirts and ties. I finished my degree while managing our household, our budget, our future. We ate dinner together most nights. We planned weekend trips to his parents' cabin. We talked about marriage, children, the house we'd buy someday. Then the opportunities started. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something," David said one evening in our second year. He was pacing our small living room, running his hands through his hair. "There's this conference in Chicago. Industry leaders, networking opportunities, potential clients. Okay, sounds good for your career. The thing is, the company will only cover basic expenses. If I want to make real connections, I need to stay at the right hotel, eat at the right restaurants, dress the part." I looked up from the budget spreadsheet I'd been working on. "How much are we talking about?" "Maybe $1,500. Total." $1,500 was half my monthly take-home pay. But David's eyes were bright with possibility, and I wanted to support his dreams. "We'll make it work," I said. I picked up an extra shift at the campus bookstore, worked overtime at a second job filing papers for an accounting firm. 25 hours became 35 hours became 45 hours. David came back from Chicago energized and full of stories about the people he'd met, the deals he could close, the future that was opening up in front of us. "This is just the beginning," he promised, kissing me with genuine gratitude. "You're investing in our future." The conferences became monthly: Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, each one requiring the right clothes, the right hotel, the right impression. I was working 50 hours a week by our third year together. My body ached constantly. I lived on coffee and determination, falling asleep over textbooks, waking up to alarm clocks that came too early. David would bring me flowers sometimes, apologetic bouquets when he noticed I was exhausted. "I know you're working hard," he'd say, wrapping his arms around me from behind while I stood at the kitchen sink. "But it's temporary. Once I make partner, everything changes." Making partner became the goal that justified everything. Every missed dinner, every weekend I worked while he played golf with clients, every dollar we spent on his career advancement. "I need to look successful to be successful," he explained, when I questioned the expensive suits, the designer briefcase, the lease on a BMW we couldn't afford. "But we're going into debt. We're investing in my image, in our future." The business ideas started in year 4. David would come home excited about some venture he'd heard about at work, some opportunity that could change everything. "It's called multi-level marketing," he said one evening, spreading brochures across our kitchen table. "But it's not a pyramid scheme. It's about building relationships, creating residual income." The startup costs were only $3,000. I worked double shifts for 2 months to cover it. The nutritional supplements David was supposed to sell filled our bathroom cabinet. He attended seminars, made phone calls, scheduled meetings with friends who stopped returning his calls. 6 months later, the boxes were still unopened. "That wasn't the right fit," David said when I asked about the inventory. "But I've got a better idea. My buddy Mike is starting a consulting firm. He needs initial investors. $5,000 this time. Then $7,000 for the restaurant franchise opportunity. Then $8,000 for the real estate investment course that would teach David to flip houses." Each venture came with detailed projections, enthusiastic explanations, promises that this was different. This was the one. I was working 60 hours a week, managing 3 part-time jobs, and taking night classes to finish my business degree. My weight dropped to 98 pounds. I had chronic headaches, persistent insomnia, and a constant knot in my stomach. "You look tired," David would say occasionally. "Maybe you should take a break." But someone had to pay for his opportunities. Someone had to keep our household running while he chased his dreams. The red flags started small. Phone calls he took in another room, working dinners that lasted until midnight, weekend golf tournaments with clients I never met. "Who's Sarah?" I asked one evening, noticing the name on his phone screen. "Sarah Williams. She's in accounting at Peterson Industries. We're working on their marketing campaign." His answer was smooth, natural, completely believable. I believed everything back then. The missed anniversaries started in year 6. David would apologize profusely, promise to make it up to me, explain that work was just crazy right now. "You understand, right? You know how important this promotion is for us." I understood. I always understood. When he started working late 3 nights a week, I admired his dedication. When he began traveling twice a month instead of once, I supported his career growth. When he stopped asking about my day, my work, my dreams, I told myself he was just stressed. The physical intimacy faded gradually. So slowly, I barely noticed at first. Weeks between conversations that weren't about schedules or bills. Months between moments when he really looked at me, really saw me. We're both just tired, I told myself when we went 6 months without being intimate. This is normal for couples who work hard. By year 7, I was essentially living alone with a roommate who happened to be my husband. David left early, came home late, and spent weekends networking or unwinding with colleagues I'd never met. I managed our finances, cleaned our apartment, did our laundry, bought our groceries, planned our social calendar around his availability. When I brought up couples counseling, David dismissed it immediately. We don't need therapy. We need success. Once I make partner, we'll have time for each other. Making partner was always 6 months away. Always just around the corner. Always the solution to problems I was starting to suspect had nothing to do with his career. The total loans had reached $25,000 by year 8. $25,000 I'd earned working overtime, taking second jobs, sacrificing sleep and health and happiness. None of David's business ventures had succeeded. The networking had produced business cards, but no real opportunities. The conferences had generated expense reports, but no promotions. But I kept working, kept giving, kept believing that love meant never questioning, never complaining, never asking for more than I was getting. I thought I was being supportive. I thought I was being strong. I thought I was being a good wife. I was actually being an enabler. Only when the cycle broke did I see the truth hiding in plain sight. The text message came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. I was 35 years old, lying in bed beside my husband of 8 years, when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. David was in the shower, and the screen lit up with a notification that changed everything. You know I'll always pick you. See you tomorrow night. -F. My heart stopped. I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas. You know I'll always pick you. Not I'll see you at the meeting. Not thanks for your help with the Peterson account. But I'll always pick you. Intimate words, personal words. Words that belonged between lovers, not colleagues. Essa Sarah Williams from accounting. My hands were shaking as I picked up his phone. No password protection. David had always said he had nothing to hide. The message thread with Sarah went back months, hundreds of messages, good morning texts, good night wishes, inside jokes, shared lunches, shared secrets, shared love. Can't wait to see you tonight. Rebecca's working late again. She never questions anything. Makes this easier. You're so different from her. You actually see me. I hate lying. But what choice do we have? I scrolled through months of my marriage being discussed like an inconvenience, months of my work schedule being used to plan their meetings, months of my trust being weaponized against me. The shower was still running, David singing off-key like he always did when he was happy. I sat there in our bed, reading evidence of his betrayal, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Every late night, every missed dinner, every weekend work emergency that couldn't wait until Monday. Sarah Williams wasn't just a colleague. She was his other life. The life he'd built with the time and money I'd given him. I thought about the $25,000, the overtime hours, the sacrifices I'd made so he could attend networking events where he'd apparently been networking with someone who wasn't his wife. Every opportunity I'd funded had been an opportunity to betray me. Every dollar I'd earned working double shifts had bought him freedom to pursue someone else. Every time I'd said, "We'll make it work," I'd been financing my own heartbreak. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't supporting David's career. I was subsidizing his affair. I'd enabled this. Every yes when I should have said no. Every sacrifice when I should have demanded reciprocity. Every time I'd put his needs ahead of my own well-being. Unconditional love, I realized, had created conditional loyalty. I heard the shower turn off and quickly put the phone back on the nightstand. David emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist, humming the same song he'd been singing. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my expression. "Fine. Just tired." He kissed the top of my head absently, already reaching for his phone. I watched him read Sarah's message, watched his face soften with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "Work emergency," he said, not looking at me. "I need to make a quick call." He stepped into our living room, and I heard his voice drop to the intimate whisper I remembered from our early days, the tone he'd once used only with me. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and finally understood the pattern I'd been trapped in for 8 years. Crisis, solution, gratitude, repeat. Every time David had a problem, I solved it. Every time he faced consequences, I rescued him. Every time reality threatened to catch up with his choices, I provided a cushion. I'd trained him to see me as a resource instead of a partner. I'd taught him that my love came without conditions, so he'd learn to give his love with conditions attached. The thesis statement formed in my mind with brutal clarity: sacrifice without boundaries invites betrayal. When you give everything, you teach people to take everything. When you ask for nothing, you get exactly that. When you love without limits, you create space for someone to love you within limits. I'd spent 8 years proving I would always be there, always give more, always accept less. So David had learned to expect exactly that from me while giving his best self to someone who hadn't earned it through endless sacrifice. Sarah got his attention, his time, his emotional energy, his genuine affection. I got his bills, his laundry, his problems to solve, his messes to clean up. I got the job of being his wife. She got the joy of being his choice. The guilt I'd carried for years, guilt about not being enough, not giving enough, not loving enough, suddenly transformed into something else entirely: understanding. I hadn't failed as a wife. I'd failed as my own advocate. I hadn't loved too little. I'd demanded too little. I hadn't given too much. I'd accepted too little in return. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't angry at myself for not being whatever David needed. I was angry at David for taking everything I offered and still choosing someone else. The pattern was clear now. Devastating, but clear. Evidence piled up, each piece more damning than the last. I couldn't sleep after finding those text messages, so I did what I always did when I needed to think clearly. I made spreadsheets. 3 a.m. in our kitchen, surrounded by bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts I'd kept meticulously for 20 years. My accounting background made me a natural record keeper. Every dollar tracked, every expense categorized. I'd never added it all up before, never looked at the big picture. The number was staggering: $130,000. $130,000 over 20 years of marriage. More than most people's annual salary, poured into David's dreams, crises, and opportunities that never materialized. I broke it down by category, creating the kind of detailed analysis I'd learned in business school. Education and career advancement, $23,000. Final semester tuition, $8,000. Professional wardrobe, $3,100. $100. Conference expenses, $11,800. Fade business ventures, $47,000. Multi-level marketing startup, $3,000. 1988. Consulting firm investment, $5,000. 190.89. Restaurant franchise fees, $7,000. Real estate course and materials, $8,000. 190. Import-export venture, $12,000. 199. Technology startup, $15,000. 199. Debt bailouts, $38,000. Credit card emergencies, $22,000. Various years. Car loan default, $8,000. 190. Personal loan to tide him over, $8,000. Lifestyle subsidies, $22,000. Golf club membership, $1,000 annually. 9. BMW lease payments, $4,200 when he couldn't afford them. Client entertainment expenses, $7,000. Emergency cash for networking events, 9,000. The patterns were even more revealing than the totals. In our first year of marriage, David asked for financial help twice. By year 5, it was monthly. By year 10, it was weekly. Small requests that grew larger. Emergency loans that were never repaid. Temporary support that became permanent subsidies. The manipulation tactics had evolved too, becoming more sophisticated as David learned what worked. The guilt trip, years 1-5. If you loved me, you'd help me succeed. The partnership plea, years 6-10. We're a team. We invest in each other. The crisis declaration, years 11-15. Without this money, everything falls apart. The emotional blackmail, years 16-20. I never asked you for anything. This one time, can't you support me? Never asked for anything. The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. I pulled out my work calendars from the past decade. Overtime hours highlighted in yellow. Weekend shifts marked in red. Night classes and second jobs tracked in meticulous detail. While I was working 65-hour weeks in 1995, David was playing golf twice a week with potential clients. While I was taking accounting classes at night to increase my earning potential, he was attending wine tastings and networking events that produced nothing but business cards and hangovers. Every crisis had been solved the same way. Rebecca works more, David benefits more. The credit card bailouts were particularly painful to review. $22,000 over 15 years, always framed as emergencies that weren't actually emergencies. The car needs new tires, and I maxed out my card at that client dinner last week. I had to put the conference hotel on credit, and now I can't make the minimum payment. Sarah's birthday is coming up, and the team always goes in together on something nice. Sarah's birthday. Even his affair had been subsidized by my overtime hours. I found the pattern in my own behavior too. Every time David asked for help, I'd work extra hours rather than say no. I'd skip meals to save money for his opportunities. I'd postpone my own needs, dental work, new clothes, car repairs, to fund his latest venture. I'd enabled his dependency by making it consequence-free. When his business ideas failed, I covered the losses. When his networking produced no results, I funded more networking. When his credit cards reached their limits, I paid them off and watched him max them out again. I'd removed every incentive for him to succeed on his own by ensuring he never had to face the full cost of his failures. The most damning evidence wasn't financial, it was temporal. I tracked David's schedule for the past year using his calendar, his travel receipts, his credit card statements. Tuesday evenings, working late with the Peterson team. Translation, dinner with Sarah. Thursday afternoons, client meeting downtown. Translation, afternoon with Sarah. Weekend business trips, conference in Chicago. Translation, getaway with Sarah. Every lie had been funded by my extra shifts, my overtime hours, my willingness to work harder so he could play more. I'd been paying for my own betrayal. Literally. The recognition hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just enabled David's irresponsibility. I'd enabled his capacity to betray me. Every dollar I'd given him was a dollar he didn't have to earn himself. Every problem I'd solved was a consequence he didn't have to face. Every crisis I'd rescued him from was a lesson in accountability he'd never had to learn. I'd trained him to see me as an unlimited resource and other people as entertainment. The affair wasn't a failure of love. It was the inevitable result of a relationship where one person gave everything and the other person learned to take everything as their right. Sarah got his emotional energy because I'd never demanded any. She got his time because I'd never required him to invest time in our marriage. She got his attention because I'd never insisted on being a priority. I'd made myself so available, so accommodating, so endlessly giving that David had learned to see me as furniture, always there, always functional, never requiring maintenance or appreciation. The $130,000 wasn't the real cost. The real cost was 20 years of teaching someone that my love was free, my time was unlimited, and my needs were optional. I'd created a monster, a perfectly entitled, consequence-free, accountability-proof monster who saw his wife as a service provider and other women as prizes to be pursued. At 4:30 a.m., I closed the accounting ledger and sat in my dark kitchen, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd done to myself. I'd spent 20 years proving I would always be there, so David had learned he never had to earn my presence, my support, or my love. And when someone offers you everything for free, you start looking for what you actually have to work for, what actually challenges you, what actually makes you feel like you're worth something because you had to earn it. Sarah had made David chase her. I'd made myself available for chasing. The breaking point came when my body broke down before my spirit did. The chest pain started at 2:15 p.m. on a Thursday in November. I was at my desk at Morrison Accounting, working on quarterly reports for 3 different clients, when my heart began racing like a hummingbird trapped in a cage. Sharp stabbing pains radiated down my left arm, and suddenly I couldn't catch my breath. "Rebecca?" My coworker Janet looked up from her computer. "You okay? You're white as a sheet." I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The pain was crushing, like someone had wrapped steel bands around my chest and was tightening them with each heartbeat. "I'm calling 911, Janet said, already reaching for her phone. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. Blood pressure 180, 110, heart rate 142 beats per minute. The EKG machine printed out a strip of paper that made the lead paramedic frown and call ahead to the emergency room. "Possible cardiac event," I heard him say into his radio. "Female, 42 years old, chest pain, elevated vitals, concerning EKG changes." 42 years old. Too young for a heart attack, but my body apparently hadn't gotten that memo. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and IV lines and worried faces. I kept thinking about David, wondering if someone had called him, if he knew where I was, if he was scared. At Mercy General, they rushed me straight into the cardiac unit. Nurses attached monitors, drew blood, asked rapid-fire questions about my symptoms, my medical history, my medications. "Is there someone we should call?" asked Dr. Patel, reviewing my chart. "My husband, David Martinez. He works at Peterson Marketing." The nurse made the call while they performed more tests. EKG, chest X-ray, blood work to check for enzyme levels that would indicate actual heart damage. "Good news," Dr. Patel said an hour later. "You're not having a heart attack, but your body is showing severe signs of chronic stress." "When did you last have a full physical?" I couldn't remember. Maybe 3 years ago. I'd been too busy working to worry about checkups. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high," he continued. "Your cortisol levels are through the roof. Your body is essentially in constant fight-or-flight mode. What's been going on in your life?" "Everything. Work, money, David's latest business venture, the secret text messages, the mounting evidence of an affair I wasn't supposed to know about." "Just stress," I said weakly. My phone buzzed with a text message. Finally. "David," Janet called. "Heard you're at the hospital. Are you okay? Can you call me when you're out?" "I'm in meetings all afternoon, but can probably break free around 6. I stared at those words until they blurred through my tears. "Can you call me when you're out?" Not "I'm on my way," not "which hospital," not "I'm canceling everything to be with you." "Can you call me when you're out?" Like I was at the grocery store. Like this was an inconvenience to his schedule. Like his wife potentially having a heart attack at 42 was something that could wait until after his meetings. The nurse, Maria, according to her badge, noticed my expression. "Everything okay, honey?" I held up my phone, showing her the message. Maria read it, and her face changed. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. "Working. He can't break free until 6. Maria's jaw tightened. Can't break free? From work? When his wife is in the cardiac unit? When she put it like that, it sounded even worse. "He's got an important client presentation." "More important than you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. More important than me. I'd never thought about it that directly before, but the answer was obvious. David's work had always been more important than me. His opportunities, his networking events, his business ventures, his needs, his schedule. his priorities. I wasn't even on the list. I'm going to be here for a while, Maria said, settling into the chair beside my bed. Night shift doesn't start until 7, and you shouldn't be alone. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Nobody should be alone in the hospital. She was right. Nobody should be alone in the hospital. But here I was, alone, because my husband of 20 years had meetings he couldn't break free from. Around 4 p.m., Maria brought me soup from the cafeteria. Not because it was her job, but because she'd noticed I hadn't eaten anything. Turkey and rice, she said, settling back into her chair. My grandmother's cure for everything. Why are you being so kind to me? Maria smiled sadly. Because I was married to a man like your husband once. I know what that loneliness feels like. We sat in comfortable silence while I ate the soup. It tasted better than anything I'd had in months. Maybe because someone had given it to me out of genuine care instead of obligation. My phone buzzed again. David, how much longer do you think you'll be? I made dinner reservations for 7:30. Dinner reservations. While I was in the cardiac unit, David was making dinner reservations. Is that him again? Maria asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Honey, I want you to really think about something. When was the last time this man put you first? When was the last time your needs took priority over his wants? I thought about it, really thought about it. I couldn't remember a single instance. Not when I was working 3 jobs to pay for his college. Not when I was sacrificing sleep to fund his business ventures. Not when I was covering his debt, his mistakes, his irresponsibility. Never. In 20 years of marriage, I had never once been David's first priority. I am not his priority, I said out loud, the words falling into the sterile hospital air like stones into water. No, Maria said gently, you're not. The truth crystallized with brutal clarity. I was David's support system, not his partner. His safety net, not his priority. His service provider, not his beloved wife. And I'd been so busy being grateful for the crumbs of his attention that I'd never noticed I was starving. It was in recovery that the truth became inescapable. Dawn crept through the hospital window like a reluctant truth. I'd been awake all night, watching the numbers on my heart monitor slowly return to normal ranges. Blood pressure down to 140/90, heart rate steady at 72. The physical crisis was passing, but something deeper was crystallizing in the quiet darkness. Maria had stayed until her shift ended at 7 p.m., bringing me magazines, adjusting my pillows, checking on me every hour like I was someone who mattered. When she left, she squeezed my hand and said, "Take care of yourself, Rebecca. You're worth taking care of." David never showed up. He texted at 8:30, "Hope you're feeling better. Got caught up with the Peterson presentation. Home late tonight." No visit, no flowers. No concern about whether I was okay, or what the doctors had found, or if I needed anything. Just an explanation about why his work was more important than his wife's potential heart attack. At 10 p.m., he texted again, "Can you pick up my dry cleaning tomorrow? The blue suit needs to be ready for the Morrison meeting." While I was lying in a cardiac unit hooked up to monitors, David was thinking about dry cleaning. The contrast was devastating. A stranger, Maria, had shown me more genuine care in 6 hours than my husband had shown me in 6 months. She'd brought soup because she thought I might be hungry. He'd sent logistics about laundry pickup. She'd sat with me because she didn't want me to be alone. He'd stayed away because other things were more important. The truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was never his first choice. I'd never been his first choice. Not when we were dating and I was working 3 jobs to pay for our future. Not when we were newlyweds and I was funding his networking events. Not now, 20 years later, when I was lying in a hospital bed and he was worried about dry cleaning schedules. I'd spent 2 decades being grateful for whatever attention David gave me, whatever time he could spare from his real priorities. I'd been so busy being thankful for his presence that I'd never noticed his absence. When was the last time he'd asked about my dreams? When had he last supported my goals? When had he ever rearranged his schedule around my needs? The questions were rhetorical, because the answers were never. I thought about Maria again. How she'd looked genuinely concerned when I showed her David's text. How she'd said, nobody should be alone in the hospital. How she'd made sure I wasn't. That was what love looked like. Showing up. Prioritizing. Making someone feel like they mattered more than meetings and presentations and dry cleaning. David had taught me to be grateful for crumbs. Maria had reminded me what a full meal felt like. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from David. By the way, can you transfer $500 to my account? The Peterson dinner ran over budget, and my card got declined. Kind of embarrassing. I stared at that message for 20 minutes. Even now, even while I was in the hospital with stress-induced chest pain from working myself into the ground to fund his lifestyle, even after missing my cardiac episode for a client presentation, even after sending me logistics about laundry instead of love about my health, even now he was asking me to solve his financial problems. The pattern was so clear, it took my breath away. Every conversation was about what I could do for him. Every interaction involved me giving and him receiving. Every crisis became my responsibility to fix. I wasn't his wife. I was his employee, his unpaid, unappreciated, always available employee who worked overtime without benefits and got criticized when the service wasn't fast enough. The grief hit me like a physical wave. I wasn't mourning David. I was mourning the marriage I'd thought we had, the partnership I'd believed we were building, the love I'd convinced myself we were sharing. None of it had ever existed. I'd been in a relationship with someone who saw me as a resource, not a person. Someone who measured my worth by my usefulness, not my humanity. Someone who'd learned that my love was free, and my money was available, and my time was unlimited. I'd taught him all of that. Every time I said yes when I meant no. Every time I gave more when I should have demanded reciprocity. Every time I rescued him from consequences that might have taught him to value what I provided. The realization should have been devastating. But instead it felt like relief. Finally, I understood why I felt so empty despite giving everything. Why I felt so lonely despite being married. Why I felt so exhausted despite loving so hard. You can't fill someone else's life by emptying your own. You can't create a partnership by being the only partner. You can't love someone into loving you back. The decision formed in my mind with surprising clarity. No more rescuing. No more working overtime to fund his opportunities. No more sacrificing my health for his comfort. No more accepting crumbs and calling them a feast. No more enabling behavior that hurt both of us. I was 42 years old. If I lived to be 80, I had 38 years left. I could spend them being David's unpaid support staff, or I could spend them discovering what it felt like to be someone's priority. Starting with being my own priority. The $500 transfer request sat unanswered on my phone. For the first time in 20 years, David's financial crisis was going to remain his financial crisis. I was done rescuing someone who couldn't be bothered to rescue me. Returning home, I started the work of reclaiming myself. I came home from the hospital on Friday afternoon to an empty house and a stack of David's bills on the kitchen counter. Credit card statement, $3,000 overdue. Car payment, 2 months behind. The Peterson dinner that had caused his embarrassing declined card, $387 for 2 people at the city's most expensive steakhouse. While I'd been in the cardiac unit, David had been dining on Wagyu beef and wine that cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a month. The old Rebecca would have transferred money immediately, would have worked extra hours to cover the bills, would have apologized for not handling his financial crisis from my hospital bed. The new Rebecca walked straight to my home office and sat down to write a letter. "Dear David," I began, my hands steadier than they'd been in months. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as 20 years of suppressed truth poured onto the page. For 20 years, I believed that love meant saying yes to everything you asked for. I thought that sacrifice was proof of devotion, that endless giving was evidence of good marriages. I was wrong. I have given you $130,000 over the course of our marriage. I have worked myself into stress-induced heart problems to fund your dreams, your mistakes, and your affair with Sarah Williams. Yes, I know about Sarah. I know about the text messages, the dinners, the trips, the lies. I know that my overtime hours have been paying for your other relationship. This stops now. My love is free. My money is not. From this point forward, I will not cover your debts, fund your ventures, or rescue you from the consequences of your choices. I will not work extra hours to subsidize a lifestyle you haven't earned. I will not sacrifice my health for your comfort. This is not punishment. This is protection for both of us. You are capable of supporting yourself. You're capable of being responsible for your own choices. You're capable of growth, but only if you're allowed to face the natural consequences of your actions. I love you enough to stop enabling you. I hope someday you'll understand why. I signed the letter Rebecca instead of Love Rebecca or Your Wife Rebecca, just my name. Clean, simple, independent. Then I did something I'd been afraid to do for 20 years. I removed my wedding ring. The thin gold band had lived on my finger for so long, it had created a permanent indent in my skin, a groove that marked where my commitment had been, where my identity as David's wife had resided. I held the ring up to the afternoon light streaming through my office window. It was beautiful, simple, classic. We'd bought it together in 1986, spending more than we could afford because I'd believed it represented forever. But forever had turned out to be one-sided. The ring represented a promise that had been broken, not with the affair, but with 20 years of taking my love for granted. 20 years of seeing my sacrifice as his right. 20 years of treating our marriage like a service contract instead of a partnership. I walked to our bedroom and opened the small safety deposit box I kept in our closet. Inside were important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, my grandmother's pearl earrings. I placed the wedding ring inside, next to the pearls. Symbolic objects representing different kinds of love. The pearls, given with joy and received with gratitude. The ring, given with hope and returned with disappointment. The ring could stay there until David proved he understood the difference between having a wife and having an employee. Next, I called my bank. I need to freeze all joint accounts immediately, I told the customer service representative. Is this due to suspected fraud? Yes, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Suspected fraud. It wasn't technically a lie. David had been defrauding our marriage for years. The bank representative walked me through the process. Joint checking account, frozen. Joint savings account, frozen. Joint credit cards, spending privileges suspended pending account holder verification. You'll need both parties to reactivate the accounts, she explained. I understand. My next call was to Linda Patterson, a family law attorney I'd met through work. We'd done the books for her firm for 3 years, and I'd always admired her no-nonsense approach to protecting her clients. Rebecca? Linda sounded surprised to hear from me. What can I do for you? I need to protect myself financially. My husband has been irresponsible with money and unfaithful. I see. How soon can you come in? Is Monday too soon? Monday's perfect. Bring all your financial records, bank statements, tax returns, everything. We'll figure out how to protect your assets while you decide what you want to do about the marriage. After hanging up, I sat in my office feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: control. For the first time in 2 decades, I was making decisions based on my own well-being instead of David's convenience. I was protecting my own interests instead of enabling his irresponsibility. The letter sat on my desk, sealed and ready for delivery. The wedding ring sat in the safety deposit box, waiting for a man who might never deserve to see it again. The joint account sat frozen, consequences finally catching up with choices that had been consequence-free for too long. My phone rang. David. Rebecca? I just tried to buy gas and my card was declined. Is there a problem with the account? Yes, I said calmly. There's a problem with the account. Well, can you fix it? I'm stuck at the gas station. The old Rebecca would have transferred money immediately, would have apologized for the inconvenience, would have solved his problem without asking any questions about how he'd gotten into it. The new Rebecca said, No, David, I can't fix it. You'll need to figure it out yourself. What do you mean you can't fix it? It's our joint account. Not anymore. The silence that followed was profound. Rebecca, what's going on? There's a letter on your desk that explains everything. I hung up before he could respond. 10 minutes later, I heard his car in the driveway. Apparently, he'd figured out the gas station situation on his own. Imagine that. The consequences rippled through our families in unexpected ways. The phone calls started within hours. First, David's sister, Carol. Rebecca, honey, what's going on? David called me crying, saying you've frozen all the accounts and taken off your wedding ring. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Then his mother. This is so unlike you, dear. David says you're being unreasonable about money. Surely you two can work this out like adults. Finally, his brother Tom. Look, I don't know what David did, but cutting off his access to money seems extreme. Can't you just talk it through? I met my friend Janet for coffee on Sunday morning, to escape the constant calls. Janet had been there the day I collapsed at work, had ridden in the ambulance with me, had seen firsthand how David responded to his wife's medical emergency. So what's the family saying? Janet asked, settling into the booth across from me at Murphy's Cafe. That I'm being unreasonable. That I should be more understanding. That marriage is about compromise. Compromise. Janet stirred her coffee with more force than necessary. You've been compromising for 20 years. What exactly has David compromised? Good question. His sister called this morning, I continued. She said David spent 2 hours at her house yesterday, going through old photo albums and crying about how much he loves me. Did he mention Sarah Williams? Not once. According to Carol, I'm having a midlife crisis and punishing David for working too hard to provide for our future. Janet's eyebrows shot up. Working too hard? The man missed your heart episode for a client dinner. Apparently that shows dedication to our financial security. The narrative David was spinning was masterful in its selective editing. I was the unstable wife having an emotional breakdown. He was the devoted husband being punished for his commitment to success. 20 years of financial irresponsibility became investing in their future. An ongoing affair became working closely with colleagues. What about the money? Janet asked. He's been testing the boundaries every day. Tried to use the emergency credit card Thursday. Declined. Attempted to transfer money from savings Friday. Blocked. Asked his mother to call the bank Saturday, claiming I was having a mental health crisis. Did that work? No. I'd already spoken to them about potential manipulation attempts. The boundary testing had escalated throughout the week. David tried charm first, flowers, apologies, promises to do better. When that failed, he moved to guilt. I never thought you could be this cruel. Then bargaining, just give me access to enough money for basics. By Friday, he'd moved to threats. If you don't unfreeze the accounts, I'm staying at Tom's place until you come to your senses. Let me get this straight, Janet said slowly. Your husband of 20 years is threatening to leave you because you won't give him money to continue his affair. When she put it that way, the absurdity was breathtaking. His exact words were, "He never thought you'd actually go through with it," I told her. According to Tom, David always assumed I was bluffing about consequences. Because you never followed through before. Never. Every ultimatum became a negotiation. Every boundary became a suggestion. Every consequence became another problem for me to solve. The isolation was the hardest part. David's family saw me as the problem, not him. Mutual friends were choosing sides, and most were choosing his because his version of events was more comfortable than the truth. Nobody wanted to believe that charming David Martinez had been living a double life funded by his wife's overtime hours. It was easier to believe that Rebecca was having a breakdown than to acknowledge that David was having an affair. What about work? Janet asked. He called my boss Friday, claiming I was under severe stress and might not be making rational decisions about our finances. That's manipulative as hell. It's also unsuccessful. Linda, my attorney, warned me he might try to undermine my credibility. We're documenting everything. Janet reached across the table and squeezed my hand. How are you holding up? Better than I expected. Scared, but relieved? For the first time in 20 years, I'm not responsible for fixing David's problems. And he's learning that actions have consequences. Slowly, very slowly. My phone buzzed with another text from David. Please call me. We need to talk. I can't live like this. I showed the message to Janet. Notice anything? I asked. It's all about him. His need to talk. His inability to live like this. No acknowledgement of what he did. No apology for the affair. No recognition of the financial burden he's created. Just his discomfort with facing consequences. I turned off my phone and finished my coffee. True change meant rebuilding my life from the ground up. Linda Patterson's law office smelled like leather and confidence. I sat across from her mahogany desk on Monday morning, surrounded by file folders that represented 20 years of my financial life spread out for examination. This is quite a paper trail, Linda said, reviewing the bank statements, credit card bills, and loan documents I'd brought. You've been essentially supporting two households, yours and his affair. The words should have stung, but they felt like validation instead. Someone finally saw the pattern clearly. What do you recommend? Full financial separation while you decide about divorce. But first, we need to protect your assets legally. Linda pulled out a legal pad. Let's start with your will. I'd never thought about dying before. At 42, death seemed theoretical, distant. But lying in that hospital bed had made it real. What if something had happened to me? Everything would have gone to David. Everything I'd worked for, saved for, sacrificed for, would have funded his new life with Sarah. I want David removed as my beneficiary, I said firmly. Everything goes to my sister Elena. What about retirement accounts, life insurance? Change it all. Elena gets everything. Linda made notes as we restructured my entire legal existence. Emergency contacts changed from David to Elena and Janet. Medical power of attorney transferred to my sister. Financial power of attorney assigned to my accountant, Robert Chen, who'd been managing my business clients for years. What about the house? Linda asked. It's in both names, but I've been making the mortgage payments for 15 years. Can we document that? Absolutely. We'll need payment records, tax returns, anything that shows the source of funds for major expenses. The documentation process took 3 hours, 20 years of financial records reorganized to show the truth. I'd been the primary earner, the primary saver, and the primary financial contributor to our marriage. David had been the primary spender. One more thing, I told Linda as we wrapped up. I want to establish a fund, $20,000 for women's education scholarships. Any particular focus? Women returning to school after divorce. Women who need to rebuild their lives, start careers, become financially independent. Women like I should have been years ago, if I'd had the courage to leave when the red flags first appeared. The scholarship fund felt like turning my pain into purpose. Every dollar David had wasted on failed ventures could now help a woman build real success. Every sacrifice I'd made could now help someone else avoid the trap of financial dependence. The next step was harder, changing my living space. Our house had been decorated around David's preferences for 20 years. His favorite colors, his comfortable chair, his sports memorabilia, his books on the shelves. I'd made myself invisible in my own home. That weekend, I rearranged everything. David's oversized leather recliner went to Goodwill, replaced by a reading chair in soft blue fabric. His golf trophies disappeared from the mantel, replaced by photos of my family, my friends, my achievements. The spare bedroom, which had served as David's office for his various failed ventures, became my sanctuary. I painted the walls sage green, my favorite color, which I'd never used because David said it was too feminine. I hung art I'd bought but never displayed because David thought it was weird. I created a space that felt like me instead of us. The transformation was remarkable. For the first time in decades, I walked into my house and felt at home. The social changes were more challenging, but equally necessary. I'd lost touch with friends during my years of working overtime to fund David's dreams. My social circle had shrunk to David's colleagues and their wives, people who now saw me as the bitter woman who'd abandoned her husband during his difficult time. I started volunteering at the literacy center downtown, teaching basic math to adults working toward their GEDs. The work reminded me why I'd loved accounting in the first place. The satisfaction of helping people understand numbers, take control of their finances, build better lives. "You're good at this," said Maria Santos, the volunteer coordinator. Not the Maria from the hospital, a different Maria who became another angel in my rebuilding process. "I like helping people see that numbers aren't scary. They're just information. Have you considered teaching? The community college is always looking for adjunct instructors." Teaching. I'd never thought about teaching, but the idea sparked something in me I hadn't felt in years. Excitement about my own future. The volunteer work connected me with other women rebuilding their lives. Divorced mothers returning to school, widows learning to manage finances their husbands had always handled. Women like me, discovering who they were outside of relationships that had defined them. "There's a support group that meets Thursday nights," mentioned Karen, a woman in her 50s who was getting her GED after 30 years as a housewife. "Women in transition. We call it the Phoenix Group." Phoenix Group? You know, rising from the ashes of our old lives. I joined the Phoenix Group the next Thursday, 12 women in a community center classroom, sharing stories of transformation, divorce, death, job loss, empty nest syndrome, different triggers, same journey toward rediscovering themselves. "I spent 25 years being someone's wife," shared Linda. "Not my attorney, but another Linda. I forgot I was ever just Linda." The stories resonated deeply. Women who'd lost themselves in service to others. Women who'd measured their worth by their usefulness. Women who'd confused love with self-sacrifice. Women like me. For the first time in years, I felt understood, not judged for setting boundaries, not criticized for wanting respect, not blamed for someone else's choices. "How long have you been separated?" asked Jennifer, a woman about my age. 3 weeks. The first month is the hardest. After that, you start remembering who you are. Who I was. The question felt revolutionary. For 42 years, I'd been someone's daughter, someone's student, someone's employee, someone's wife. I'd never just been Rebecca. The structural changes, legal, physical, social, were creating space for that discovery. Space for me to exist without reference to someone else's needs, wants, or opinions. When confrontation finally arrived, I stood ready. David chose Murphy's Cafe for our meeting. Neutral territory, he said. The same place where I'd told Janet about my decision to set boundaries. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, looking thinner than he had a month ago. Stress had carved lines around his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. This was what consequences looked like on someone who'd never faced them before. "Rebecca," he stood up when he saw me, uncertain whether to hug me, kiss me, or shake my hand. I slid into the booth across from him. "Hello, David." The waitress brought coffee without being asked. We'd been coming here for years, back when we were a couple who went places together. "You look good," David said quietly. "Rested." I did feel rested. For the first time in decades, I was sleeping through the night, instead of lying awake, worrying about bills, business ventures, and crises that weren't actually mine to solve. "How are you managing?" I asked. Not because I intended to rescue him, but because I was genuinely curious how he was handling his first month of adult responsibility. "It's hard," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Really hard. I never realized how much you did, how much you handled. The bills, the scheduling, the everything. I know. I got a second job, part-time, weekends, stock boy at Target." He said it like he expected praise for this basic adult behavior. "Good for you." David leaned forward, his eyes bright with the kind of intensity he used to reserve for business opportunities. "Rebecca, I want to come home. I want us to fix this. I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I interrupted. "David, you had a 15-year affair. You spent $130,000 of money I earned on your fantasies and failures. You missed my heart episode for a client dinner. Those aren't mistakes. Those are choices." His face crumpled. "I know. You're right. I was selfish. I was thoughtless. I was..." You were entitled, I said calmly. You learned to see my love as your right, and my money as your inheritance. But I can change. I am changing. Look, he pulled out a piece of paper. I made a budget. I'm tracking my expenses. I'm being responsible with money for the first time in my life. I glanced at the handwritten budget. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas, basic adult expenses he'd never had to consider because I'd been covering them for 20 years. That's good, David. You should be proud of yourself. His face lit up with hope. So you'll unfreeze the accounts? You'll let me come home? No. The word hung between us like a wall. But I'm changing. I'm being responsible. For 4 weeks, after 20 years of irresponsibility. David's expression shifted from hope to frustration to something approaching panic. What do you want from me? I got a second job. I made a budget. I ended things with... He stopped, realizing he'd almost mentioned Sarah. With Sarah? Yes, with Sarah. It's over. Has been since you found out. You ended a 15-year relationship because I found out about it. Not because you realized it was wrong. Because you got caught. David was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca, please. I love you. I want to save our marriage. Do you love me, David? Or do you love what I provide? I love you. When was the last time you asked about my dreams? My goals? My feelings about anything that didn't relate to your needs? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The question was unanswerable because the behavior had never existed. I can learn to be a better husband. Maybe you can, but I can't learn to be a worse wife. What does that mean? It means I spent 20 years making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I'm not going to do that anymore. David's voice rose with desperation. So what are you saying? You want a divorce? I'm saying I want a husband, not a dependent. I want a partner, not a project. I want someone who sees me as a person, not a service provider. I can be that person. Can you? Or will you be that person until things get comfortable again, and then slide back into old patterns? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously, for perhaps the first time in our conversation. I don't know, he admitted finally. I honestly don't know. The honesty was refreshing, even if it was devastating. Here's what I know, I said gently. My love is free. My money is not. What does that mean? It means I will always love the man I married, but I will never again subsidize behavior that disrespects both of us. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect, not financial dependency. So if I prove I can be responsible with money, support myself, be a better husband, then we can talk about what a healthy relationship might look like between us. David's eyes filled with tears. How long do I have to prove myself? As long as it takes. But David, you're not proving yourself to win me back. You're proving yourself because you're a grown man who should be capable of taking care of himself. And if I can't, then you'll have learned something important about who you really are. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the end of our marriage as we'd known it. I never meant to hurt you, David said finally. I know, but meaning and doing are different things. He paid for our coffee, a small gesture, but the first time he'd paid for anything involving me in months. I'll call you, he said as we stood to leave. When you have something real to say. Letting go made room for transformation. I hadn't believed possible. My morning routine became sacred. 6 a.m., coffee in my sage green reading nook, watching sunrise paint the walls gold. No phone calls about crises, no texts about overdue bills, no requests for money transfers before I'd even brushed my teeth. Just silence, peaceful, productive silence. 7 a.m., yoga in what used to be David's office. 20 minutes of stretching, breathing, inhabiting my body instead of abandoning it for everyone else's emergencies. I'd bought a mat, candles, meditation cushions, created a space for centering myself instead of constantly recentering around other people's needs. 8 a.m., breakfast at my kitchen table. Reading books I'd bought but never had time for, poetry, memoirs, novels about women who'd found themselves after losing everything they thought mattered. The routine felt luxurious because it was mine. No one else's schedule to accommodate, no one else's preferences to consider. Just Rebecca, learning what Rebecca actually liked. Turns out, I liked quiet mornings and strong coffee. I liked plants and soft music. I liked reading about other people's journeys towards self-discovery. I'd never known any of that before, because I'd never had space to find out. The Phoenix Group became my chosen family. Thursday nights in that community center classroom, 12 women supporting each other through the complicated process of becoming whole people instead of half people, searching for completion through relationships. "How are you doing with the loneliness?" asked Jennifer one evening. We'd been meeting for 2 months, and the question came up regularly. "I'm not lonely," I realized as I said it. I was lonely in my marriage. Now I'm just alone, and there's a difference. What's the difference? Lonely is wanting connection and not having it. Alone is having space to connect with yourself. Maria Santos from the Literacy Center became my closest friend. Not Maria the nurse. This Maria was 63, a widow who'd raised 4 children and was now discovering art classes, book clubs, and travel groups she'd never had time for while managing her husband's medical practice. "I spent 38 years being Dr. Santos's wife," she told me over dinner one evening. "I forgot I was ever just Maria." We understood each other perfectly. 2 women who'd spent decades being defined by their service to others, finally learning to exist for themselves. The community college teaching position materialized in September. 3 classes a week: basic accounting, personal finance, and small business management. Students who wanted to be there, who appreciated what I had to teach, who saw education as opportunity rather than obligation. Professor Martinez, my students called me, and the title felt like coming home to myself. The scholarship fund grew beyond my initial $20,000 donation. Other women in similar situations contributed smaller amounts. The Literacy Center hosted a fundraiser. Local businesses sponsored individual scholarships. By December, we'd awarded funding to 15 women returning to school after major life changes. "This is incredible," said Amy Chen, one of our first recipients. She was 34, recently divorced, studying to become a nurse after 15 years as a stay-at-home mom. "I never thought I'd be able to afford school. Education changes everything," I told her. "It gives you options you didn't know you had." Amy hugged me with genuine gratitude, and I remembered what appreciation felt like when it came from someone who truly understood the value of what they'd received. The wedding ring had been sitting in my safety deposit box for 8 months when I finally knew what to do with it. Amy was struggling financially despite the scholarship, working nights at a diner, studying during the day, caring for 2 young children, barely making rent on a tiny apartment. She never complained, never asked for additional help, just worked steadily toward her goal. "I have something for you," I told her after class one Thursday evening. I handed her the small velvet box. "Professor Martinez, I can't accept jewelry." "It's not jewelry, it's a symbol. This ring represents a promise I made 23 years ago, to love someone who couldn't love me back the same way. Now it can represent a promise you're making to yourself, to never again depend on someone else for your security." Amy opened the box, and her eyes filled with tears. "Sell it," I said gently. "Use the money for textbooks, rent, whatever you need. Transform it into something that serves your future, instead of representing someone else's past." She hugged me again, and I felt something I'd never experienced before: the joy of giving to someone who valued what they received. Someone who would use my gift to build something beautiful instead of wasting it on fantasies and failures. The Christmas letter from David arrived in December. Not a card, a letter. 3 pages of handwritten apology, accountability, and genuine change. He'd been in therapy for 4 months. He'd kept both jobs and was saving money for the first time in his adult life. He'd learned to cook, clean, and manage his own schedule. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote. "I don't expect another chance. I just want you to know that losing you was the consequence that finally taught me to value what I had. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." The letter was everything I'd wanted to hear for 20 years. But it came too late to save our marriage, and exactly on time to validate my decision to end it. I felt proud of David for growing up. I felt grateful that consequences had finally worked. I felt sad that it had taken losing everything for him to learn to appreciate anything. But I didn't feel tempted to return to him. My new life was too good to trade for an improved version of my old life. I had students who valued my knowledge. I had friends who appreciated my company. I had a home that reflected my preferences. I had routines that served my well-being. I had a purpose that felt meaningful. Most importantly, I had myself back. The self I'd lost somewhere in the transformation from partner to parent figure, from wife to service provider, from person to resource. In the quiet that followed, I found something even greater. I want to tell you something that took me 64 years to learn. Sacrifice is empty without reciprocity. I'm sitting in my home office now, 3 years after that memorial service where a stranger slipped me a letter that shattered my world. The same office where I wrote the letter that changed my life, where I removed my wedding ring, where I made the decision to choose dignity over dysfunction. The peace in this room isn't the absence of David. It's the presence of self-respect. Let me tell you what serenity actually looks like, because I spent 23 years confusing it with submission. Serenity isn't your husband coming home every night. Serenity is knowing you deserve to be chosen, not just needed. Serenity isn't having your marriage intact. Serenity is having your integrity intact. Serenity isn't avoiding conflict. Serenity is standing firm in your worth, even when other people are uncomfortable with your boundaries. David did change, by the way. Real change. He's been in therapy for 3 years now, managing his own finances, supporting himself, learning to build relationships based on reciprocity instead of dependency. He sends me Christmas cards with updates on his progress, not requests for assistance. I'm proud of his growth, but his transformation doesn't erase the 23 years of my life I spent teaching him that my love was free and my needs were optional. You can't get back the years you spent being someone's everything while they treated you like nothing, but you can decide that those years taught you something valuable about what you'll never accept again. The scholarship fund has helped 47 women now, women who send me graduation photos and wedding invitations and job announcements, women who invite me to celebrations because they want me there, not because they need me to pay for them. Amy, the young woman I gave my wedding ring to, graduated nursing school summa cum laude. She's working in pediatric oncology now, using her own difficult experiences to help other families navigate crisis with dignity and hope. She transformed that ring into textbooks, rent payments, and ultimately into a career serving others. The ring became something beautiful when it went to someone who understood its value. My students at the community college write thank you notes at the end of each semester, not because they have to, but because they genuinely appreciate learning skills that will change their lives. They see education as opportunity, not entitlement. This is what gratitude looks like when it's authentic. This is what relationships feel like when they're based on mutual respect instead of one-sided service. I've learned that there are 2 kinds of people in this world: those who see support as a gift to be honored, and those who see support as a service to be expected. You can't change someone from the second category to the first by giving them more. You can only teach them that your resources are unlimited and your boundaries are optional. But you can stop participating in your own diminishment. You can stop measuring your worth by your willingness to sacrifice your well-being for people who don't appreciate the sacrifice. You can stop confusing love with enabling, generosity with self-destruction, marriage with martyrdom. If you're reading this and seeing yourself in my story, I want you to know something. It's not too late to change the pattern. It's not too late to require reciprocity in your relationships. It's not too late to set boundaries that protect your heart while still keeping it open. It's not too late to stop funding behavior that hurts both you and the people you're trying to help. The people who truly love you will understand when you start expecting mutual respect. The people who only love what you give them will be angry, manipulative, and accusatory. Their reaction will tell you everything you need to know about what your relationship actually was. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. What would you do if you chose dignity over approval? Would the people in your life still want relationships with you? If you couldn't solve their problems, fund their dreams, or absorb their emotional chaos, would they still call, still visit, still value your presence if all you could offer was your authentic self? If the answer is no, then you don't have relationships. You have transactions disguised as love. And you deserve so much better than that. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you provide. You deserve gratitude for your generosity, not criticism for your limits. You deserve people in your life who show up for you, not just when they need something from you. The memorial service letter that destroyed my illusions was actually the greatest gift I ever received. It freed me from a marriage that existed only in my imagination and opened space for a life that exists in reality. A life where my energy flows to people who appreciate it, where my love is reciprocated, not taken for granted, where my worth isn't measured by my usefulness. I want to build a community of people who understand these truths, people who've learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier relationships. Share your story in the comments. Tell me about the moment you realized that love without respect is just sophisticated manipulation. Tell me about choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else first. Help someone who's struggling to find the courage to say no to people who only know how to take. You are not alone in this journey from enabling to empowering, from giving everything to giving wisely, from being used to being valued. And you are definitely not alone in discovering that the most loving thing you can do is teach people to value you by learning to value yourself. Because at the end of the day, the only person who can save you from a relationship that's destroying you is you. I walk to my closet now and look at the small safety deposit box where my wedding ring used to rest. Empty now, transformed into something meaningful for someone who understood its worth. Self-respect has become my new legacy. And unlike that ring, it's something no one else can take away.